Welcome back. We're talking about the 8th Summit of the Americas getting underway in Lima, Peru. Let's get back to our panel right now. And Qinduo, there have been some rumors running around Washington here that the United States plans to urge Latin American leaders to work with Washington if and when there is a potential trade war with China. Well, the Chinese ambassador to Peru has responded to that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I still have not succeeded in receiving any confirmation through official channels. If these rumors are confirmed, this action would not only be grounded in bias, it would contradict the actual facts. But it would also constitute contempt not just for China, but also for Latin America.
So, Qinduo, tough words there from the ambassador. Contempt not just for China, but for the leaders of Latin America as well. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, the initial reaction would be somehow the U.S. or the senior official, Wilbur Ross, is trying to dictate the terms, like which country Latin Americans and the Caribbean states should deal with in terms of trade and investment, and on what terms they should deal with China. So that does, sound condescending and contempt to the Chinese side, I believe, also to the Latin American side. Because they are sovereign countries, independent countries, absolutely they have the power to make the decisions, which country they want to involve, if they want to engage.
Right.
And I think, yes, on Washington side, they feel somehow, China is stealing the shine in terms of investment and trade with Latin American countries. But mostly it's really Washington's somehow overlooking of their own backyard, let's say, Latin America, and also, if you remember, President Trump's basically the description of those countries, and also the immigration issue, like the bringing, drugs and crimes to the United States. He's going to build a wall along the border with Mexico. I don't think those messages are received positively. So I think it's up to Washington, not to Beijing.
All right, very briefly, Michael, let me give you a chance to respond to what you've just heard.
Well, I mean, we're going to what's new here is that the United States is going to act in American interest. I think every head of state in Latin America generally appreciates that, with the exception of the hostile relations that we have with Cuba and Venezuela. Frankly, I think one of the opportunities for China would be to join the United States in isolating the Maduro government and the Castro and post-Castro regime, which continue to be hugely oppressive, undemocratic, and engaged in really tyrannical and reprehensible practices. I think it would be a strong statement that human rights and the plight of the people throughout the region is meaningful to Beijing. It also, I think, would be a really intriguing step forward from the standpoint of U.S.-China relations, if that were able to develop. It's one area, I think, potentially of ongoing concern, ongoing discussion.
Luis, what do you make of that? Is isolation the way to go?
I don't think so. It has been a failed policy for the last 60 years. And again, the Cuban people, they really want engagement. And Cuba won't accept an isolation from China, because at the same time they're both in the same side of the ideology. They both are ruled by a communist party. So I don't see China isolating Cuba or Venezuela with Maduro.
Roberta, let's talk about one country whose leader will not be there. That's Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro has been uninvited from this summit. What kind of attention do you think leaders at this summit are going to be giving to Venezuela? I mean, here we have a country with widespread food shortages, hyperinflation, a lot of Venezuelans fleeing across the border into Colombia as well.
As the Venezuelan crisis has escalated, I think it's become a central issue, and I do think that it will be a central issue discussed at the Summit of the Americas. That said, I don't think that leaders will come to any sort of consensus on how to move forward on Venezuela, but it will be a subject discussed thoroughly, I imagine. And potentially we could see some sort of statement coming out on this, but I don't think any sort of consensus will emerge at this point.
But could there be some kind of unified response, say, on aid to Venezuelans?
At this time, it's difficult to say. I don't believe so yet. As you know, Venezuela has yet to recognize that there is a humanitarian crisis going on. So while countries can continue providing aid to the extent possible, until Maduro can recognize the humanitarian crisis and start allowing aid in from every part of the world, I don't think we're going to see a change there.
Michael, you know, at one time President Trump was talking about a military option in Venezuela. He said that, well, he said the country was in complete chaos. But what do you expect from the United States now at the summit, specifically concerning Venezuela?
Well, it's important to note that the United States is not acting alone on Venezuela. You have Colombia, Mexico, Panama have all joined in with sanctions against Venezuela. The OAS, I believe, called the Maduro election a self-coup and one of the most corrupt elections in the history of Latin America, which is saying quite a lot. So I think you have an emerging consensus among Latin American heads of state, along with the United States, that this regime, the Maduro regime, is entirely reprehensible. Venezuelans are rising up against it. Maduro's killed 120 people of the opposition over the last several months. Yeah. There's protests every day in Caracas and throughout the country. And I think pressure is really building on this regime. I think the change will come internally, and that can happen if the U.S. and other regional powers essentially work together to support the people of Venezuela in their effort to replace this dictatorship. And that's what it is. 545 legislative individuals that are completely aligned and picked by Maduro individually. No democracy and no representative government.
Yeah, let me go to Qinduo. Qinduo, I want to talk about China now. And China is going to be at the summit as an observer. I mean, what can we read into that? That's the first time China will attend a summit of this kind as an observer.
Well, I think, you know, China's involvement in Latin America or relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean states have been growing. Back in 2015, in January, so on the forum of China, between China and the Latin America and Caribbean states, so they set up this goal of trade of $500 billion US and investment like 250. So they are well on the track to basically to achieve that goal, at least in terms of investment. And China's involvement in Latin America, especially in the past 10 years, in terms of commodity, you know, China purchased a lot of commodity from these regions. And so that's was seen as a driving force behind this, you know, almost doubling the size of a middle class in Latin America, and also, of course, significant reduction of poverty. So I think China's contribution is huge. And, you know, looking forward, you know, the cooperation also are upgrading in terms, you know, besides the commodity, obviously they are moving to high tech and manufactured goods.
Right, Roberta, of course, this summit is not just about trade, economic, and political issues. It's also about social issues or civil society issues. There will be the unveiling of a women's initiative at the summit. What can you tell us about that?
I think that this is a great step forward. As you know, in Latin America, women often are not well represented in different boards of corporations or in government. We're seeing now a move away from women leaders. And so I think that this is a good moment for that. I don't foresee many states putting this as a central issue in the summit, but I do think it's optimistic to see that there is progress on this issue, and hopefully we can see real change being made very soon.
Luis, this could be a very turbulent year in Latin America. Many elections taking place, including 6 presidential elections. And we just heard from Michael, we see the divisions on, you know, trying to resolve issues like Venezuela. Firstly, what are some of the key races, political races, elections that we should be looking at in Latin America?
I would say definitely Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. Those are the main elections, and obviously the biggest countries in the region. Brazil, now we have the former President Lula da Silva is in jail. I don't see any solution to that right now. In Mexico, the candidate for the Meade is not running in the top position. So we have AMLO as the top runner in this election, presidential election. Someone who is seen in the United States and by liberal elites, someone who is not engaged as well with the United States and doesn't want to get a good relationship in some sense with the United States. But also he has exploited this populist rhetoric.
On that point, is there a big ideological divide in the Americas, both North and South America, when it comes to allegiances that countries have, say, to the United States or to each other?
I would say that, first of all, Latin American countries, they see themselves as a community. Yeah. And the proof is the CELAC, the new Latin American countries community, that it was founded by late President Chavez. Right. Now we have to see if CELAC is going to be a successful organization or meeting. It's not an organization yet, but a summit. So we have seen some presidents who are not attending anymore. And that's going to happen as well now in the Summit of the Americas. And one president doesn't show up is like a domino effect. We saw that with Ibero-American countries summit. Okay. It's not unimportant anymore, I would say.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.